Hi, we're Nia and Marianne from Seren Health Coaching. We are metabolic health coaches who are passionate about good metabolic health for everyone. We also love to chat about all things health and to share as much information as we can with people who want to make changes to their lifestyle but aren't quite sure where to start. We're going to release a new episode every Friday where we talk about a different aspect of health. So do subscribe and let us know what you think. We'd also love to know what you're interested in too. So if there's something that you'd like us to have a chat about, do send us a message and we'll do our best to cover it soon.
Right. Hi, Nia.
Hello, how are you?
I'm okay. And I'm going to talk about something quite fun today that some of our listeners might have heard of, some might not have. But I think there'll be a lot more talk about this in the future. So we're going to talk about something called fatty livers.
Oh, lovely.
What are they?
Yeah, sounds delightful.
I know.
To be honest, I've never, it doesn't really sound good, does it? You have a fatty liver. Okay, great. So what is a fatty liver and why is it so important with metabolic health?
Right. Is it ominous? The laugh is actually that so many of us have fatty livers without knowing.
Oh, joy.
Yeah, so I suspect you haven't, but anyway, that's, on a personal level. I'm not
Thanks very
so
much.
sure about my own liver, which is older than yours and wiser or
Oh,
not.
yes.
Okay, let's start with the why bit. So why should we be interested? Well,
Okay.
your liver, I don't know if you remember this from, a long time back, is the most important organ almost in your
Yes.
body because it's
Yes.
like that absolute powerhouse. It has multiple functions. So anything that decreased its functionability would have numerous side effects,
Yeah.
particularly for how you feel, which is what I'm really interested in. So
Mm.
imagine it'd be hard to be full of energy if you had a sluggish powerhouse
Of a
liver.
liver.
So
Yeah.
I think that's why it's so important.
Yeah. I like livers because they regenerate and because,
Yes, they're sort of
amazing.
hopeful.
Yeah.
Yes,
I do like livers.
unlike some bits of you that get devastated and are not regenerable, the liver is amazingly good at healing itself. Okay,
Yeah. And, after many years of looking at people's liver function tests, it's quite
yeah,
fascinating, actually.
yeah,
So,
absolutely,
fatty liver disease, then, is what we're talking about. And is
yeah.
this relatively recent, as in sort of a new phenomenon, or do you think we've just not really noticed it before or
Yeah,
not diagnosed it before?
yeah, probably a bit of both. So as our metabolic health has got less optimal in our Western world, fatty livers obviously are part of that. So it might be that they are definitely more of a thing. But then,
Okay.
of course, we never diagnosed them before because we didn't know they were there. So basically, a bit of both.
Okay.
Historically, fatty liver would have been seen exclusively with excess alcohol consumption.
Yes. Yeah.
And that fatty liver would have been the pre-runner of what we call cirrhosis, which is where your liver becomes scarred in the next bit of this and
Yeah. And then it
fibrous and then unable to function and also unable to
to
regenerate.
regenerate. Yeah, that's the bit that I always got sad
Yeah.
about. Yeah.
But now, non-alcoholic fatty liver called
Yeah.
NAFLD
Yeah.
is much more prevalent than
Mm.
we see with alcohol, interestingly. And we see it in people who don't drink alcohol at all or drink moderate amounts of alcohol. So there's something else going on here.
Yeah.
And it's basically connected with metabolic dysfunction. It's defined as 5% to 10% of the total weight of your liver as fat,
Okay.
and it starts to affect the function. It can also go on to produce cirrhosis and liver failure in some unlucky people. So
Okay. So
it's
it isn't,
really important to know
it,
about.
yeah, it's important to know about. So knowing that we've not diagnosed this before, that we are now finding out more about this than we ever have before. What's the sort of scale of this issue? Like, we talk about
Yeah.
metabolic health and the decline in our metabolic health. So how many people are suffering with a fatty liver, do you think? Or do we know?
Well, there are all sorts of different figures, and that's the problem. But I mean, basically, often you see things like 1 in 3 I've seen Americans, because this is where the data came from, not
Yeah.
just particularly Americans, will have a fatty liver, but it's very silent in the early stages, so you definitely
Don't know
wouldn't know
you've
you
got
have
it.
it. Um, And it's incredible, really, when you think that this is practically unheard of 30 years ago. And
Yeah.
it's now the most common liver disorder in the Western world. So I suppose whatever
Okay.
figures you bandy about, it's incredibly common.
Okay. So that's not good. So
Yeah,
in terms of good news, because this is quite depressing,
right. Well, let's
can
do the good
can we do
news.
some good news?
Yeah, there is good news, interestingly. I like this. So, as long as you know about it, the good news is you really can fix it with the same metabolic fixes that we're looking at for all metabolic
Health.
disease.
Mm,
So, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you optimize your metabolic health or improve your metabolic health, your liver function will begin to improve. You'll
great.
lose some of the fat and you'll regenerate healthy tissue. I mean, there couldn't be better news, really. So,
Mm,
in many ways, you don't need a diagnosis. I would just assume that if you are metabolically not perfect, you might well have some fat in your liver, whether that's 5 to 10%, or whether you get diagnosed with fatty liver doesn't really matter.
mm,
It's all to do with improving that funny thing we've talked about before called insulin resistance.
yeah. So it's all about how efficiently our body uses our fuel, and if we can increase the
Yeah.
efficiency from which our body uses our fuel, we will improve our fatty livers as a consequence of that.
Exactly. So, do you
So
remember
yeah,
we talked about storing fat? So, when we eat excess energy, and you
yeah,
can imagine if you're young and really fit and you've got very, optimal metabolic health, this will just roll off you.
yes,
But if you're storing a lot of excess energy, some of that is stored in your liver. So, your liver starts to have to store bigger quantities.
yeah. We talked about that, didn't we? We said once it runs out of room,
Yeah. Yeah.
you once you can't burn it off, we get these pantries, and one of the places that we store them is in the liver, and then when it
Yeah.
runs out of the liver, that's when it goes round into our abdominal
Yes.
obesity, which is what we
Yes,
don't want.
exactly. So it's
Yeah,
it's all connected with the storage of fat.
yeah,
That's one bit of the story. The other bit, which is I think quite interesting, is there's the business about fructose. So
ah,
fructose
yes,
is a sugar. It's a
yeah,
type of sugar, and we often get it in drinks in our diet, actually.
mm,
And fructose is a bit like alcohol without the hangover for most of us when you think about it, because there's a lot of fructose in fruit.
yep,
It's basically the
fruit sugar,
fruit
yeah,
sugar, I suppose,
yeah,
often known as. So both fructose and alcohol are metabolized by the liver, and fructose is so good at making liver fat that
mm,
in just 1 week of eating high fructose foods, you will observe a fatter liver on an ultrasound. It's that
that's
amazingly
interesting.
sensitive.
So that's interesting, isn't it? Because this kind of ties into a lot of people who say, "Well, I need to eat my five a day," and the easiest way to eat my five a day,
Is
so they
fruit.
is fruit. So they take out the
Yeah,
chocolate bars, they put in 5 portions of fruit, but
yeah.
actually, you can see that this is really not a good idea.
No. And I
Okay.
remember I was on a course once with somebody who worked in a liver unit, and they were talking about a patient they had who was eating 19 bits of fruit a day
Wowzers.
in a whizzer. You know when
Oh, in a blender, like the
the
NutriBullet
blenders
thing.
came out and
Mm,
everybody did fruit detoxes and other things,
yeah.
and he had developed cirrhosis and liver failure
Oh my
from
goodness. Just from doing all of that.
from enough fructose to sink a boat, and he had done
Yeah.
it in the name of health. So I think this is not this is part of the story, and I
Yeah.
partly blame the 5 a day. There was
And
a
then
phenomenal.
also,
Yeah.
yeah, no, just also just in America particularly, because I know it's not the same in the UK, but
Yeah.
in some of their soft drinks, so
Yes, they
their
put
sodas,
fructose.
they put high fructose corn syrup, don't they?
Yes,
So they
of
don't use
course.
sucrose
Yes.
or sucralose.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that might also be part of the sort of explanation as to why it's increased. A
Correct.
phenomenal
Yeah.
study in 2009 explored the effect of fructose versus glucose on visceral fat. So, visceral fat's the fat around your abdominal organs you don't want.
Mm.
And all the subjects developed fat when they were fed drinks of glucose or fructose. There wasn't
Yeah.
really any difference. This is beyond what you need. But the glucose group tended to develop subcutaneous fat, so fat just under your skin. which is
Yeah.
less of a problem,
Problem
believe it
than
or
the
not,
one round your
than
middle.
the fructose group who develop much more visceral fat around their organs. So it's important because this visceral fat, of course, is part of our metabolic story.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, well, that's still very depressing, Marianne. But this is something that we're all looking out for now, and that we're now finding more and more frequently. So, how can we? Who are the people that get this, and how prevalent is this sort of for us?
Okay, so we know that we diagnose it more. We also know we're more at risk because of maybe changes in our metabolic health and what we're also our intake. We consume several times more fructose than we did a generation ago. That's sort of a fact, and that's
Yeah.
probably what the message is. So, mostly via fruit juices. I don't know, you won't remember probably, but I do remember when fruit juices became a thing. So before
Yeah.
that, really fresh fruit juices were almost unheard of in my childhood, although people with excess citrus might have done some fresh orange juice, but it
Mm,
became quite a big thing when I was a child, certainly where I grew up, that fresh fruit juices in cartons became a huge health sales thing. So we all ended
yeah.
up drinking large amounts of fruit juices which don't have the fiber and
Yeah. And then
are
they took them out, didn't they? They said that without the bits, the smooth stuff, so
yes,
it ain't
yes.
got the fibre in
So
it.
you get a very intense sugar
Absolutely.
fructose sort of spike. By the
Yeah.
way, fructose was also seen to not spike your actual blood sugar as much because it goes on a via a different pathway, which
Mm,
was to a point considered a good thing too. Being insulin resistant, which we know we need to talk about again, is a predictor of fatty liver really. So
yeah.
if you're not dealing well with that intake of sugar, because your insulin's become sort of tired and
You need more of it.
overworked.
Yeah.
Um,
Then yeah.
that that's so you've got protective mechanisms that work well as long as you're metabolically well, but don't
Mm.
work so well as you become insulin resistant. So back to that old
Chestnut.
chestnut.
Yeah. Okay. So we really, I suppose, this is just another symptom of
Yeah.
metabolic dysfunction
Yes.
that is all related back to insulin resistance,
Yes.
and then sort of goes into all the other parts of metabolic disease. So
Exactly.
high
Exactly.
triglycerides, fatty livers, abdominal obesity, high
Yes.
cholesterol,
Yes.
high blood pressure.
And
Oh, it's
by the
so much
way,
fun.
most fatty livers are often diagnosed incidentally while people are
Mm,
having ultrasounds for other things, but also it affects your lipid function, and high triglycerides often come up on the lipid profile. So
yeah,
those are the
yeah.
sort of things that would indicate that you had a bit of fatty liver. Um,
Interestingly, when we were looking at cholesterol results, so when
yeah,
we used to look at how well people were responding to certain cholesterol drugs, triglycerides, or trigs as we called them, were becoming of more and more importance as we
yes,
were
yes.
evaluating. And a drug that could bring down your trigs was amazing.
Okay, that's
Um, so
interesting.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
fascinating, isn't it? So
Yeah, a
yeah,
lot of the time was ignored originally.
yeah, no,
There was
nobody
so
really
much
looked at it.
emphasis on total cholesterols and then LDLs and HDLs, but
Yeah,
triglycerides were sort of not sure what they're about. But I knew that my patients with very high blood sugars often had very high
high trigs.
triglycerides, so
Mm.
there was the connection.
Okay, so what are we going to do about it then? Because it seems that it's related to all of this metabolic dysfunction, and that most people will have some element of a fatty liver if we're not
Yeah,
careful, if we're not looking after ourselves. So what can
I
we
mean,
do to prevent
I
it
mean,
or
it's
do it?
all the same fix. You got to stick with us, and we're gonna help you do this. But a few
Yeah.
interesting other things I found. A fatty liver was considered to be nothing more than benign side effect of fat storage originally.
Mm,
Um, but obviously, they didn't know then it was a gateway to more serious metabolic disease. Did you know almost all obese individuals will have a fatty liver? But
mm,
even lean people, so there's the rub,
yeah.
who are insulin resistant will also develop the disease, and many of these will predictably go on to develop diabetes.
So there's that
So,
link again with high trigs and
yeah,
high sugars.
yeah.
Yeah,
So, if you've
absolutely.
got a lot of visceral fat around your abdominal organs, even though you look pretty good and your BMI is within normal limits, um, on an ultrasound, you might well have a
Have a
fatty
fatty
liver.
liver.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
So the non-alcoholic fatty liver, NAFLD as they call it, I really like that word, NAFLD. It causes inflammation of the liver, which then
Yeah.
becomes chronic, causes scarring, and off you go.
Yeah.
So what can we do about it? Well, interesting. I'd say, be very careful with your liver. It's
Yeah.
a really important bit of
Important
you.
organ.
It's worth being aware about a fructose intake. So I would be very careful. I don't generally drink, and I'm sure you don't either, fruit juices.
No.
Careful around alcohol, obviously, too. But even smoothies and all of those. And as you say, soft drinks with fructose, which we generally, I don't think,
So
get
they're
in this
not, yeah.
country.
So I did a load of research into this a while ago to see, people go and they say I went to America and the pop tastes different. Well, it's actually true. They
Yeah,
do
yeah,
put
yeah,
different
yeah.
sugars in them. So it is less common in the UK, but it is more common in other areas of the world. But then there's fructose is often now put into things as a fruit
Yes,
sugar, as a natural sugar. This is a
yes,
whole
yes,
other
yes.
topic. But
Yeah,
people who are saying, well, I've cut out sugar. I only have coconut sugar, or I only have agave
yes,
syrup. Well, actually,
yeah,
no, no, no. This is actually still not good for you.
yes.
It's
It
still a
was
sugar.
sold, yeah, it was also sold as a way of not increasing your blood sugar peaks, I think, in diabetes, which was a terrible thing to sell people
Yes.
because they were actually increasing their fructose. So I
Yeah.
suppose the fix is basically stick with us, have a look at what metabolic health is, try and assess your own metabolic health. But you don't need to know all of this about yourself. What you do need to know is how to optimize that metabolic
Yeah.
health so you
Yeah.
feel great in the mornings. I mean,
Yeah.
isn't that what we're trying to do? Feel great in the
Yeah.
mornings, full
I
of
just look.
energy,
Yeah,
you
I've just
know?
looked this up just out of interest because
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
you
just like
do.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah. Apparently the sugar that's in agave syrup, because we
yeah,
talked about when you got all
yeah.
excited and
Yeah,
went
I
to
used to
Waitrose and
buy
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's not bring that up.
Sorry,
Yeah,
Marianne.
yeah,
This is fascinating. So it depends on the species from which the syrup was made.
right.
If it's in a particular species, A. tequilana, blue agave, the syrup contains some 56% to 60% fructose
Golly.
and only 20% of glucose and trace amounts of sucrose. Whereas in agave salmiana, sucrose is the main sugar.
Okay, there.
So
That's
I think it
interesting.
is really, really important to know not
What you're
only
what you're eating.
what you're
Yeah.
eating, but to be aware of these things. So,
Mm.
fructose sounds great, doesn't it? It's a fruit sugar, it's a natural sugar, but actually turns out not so great.
Yes, I would always have said fructose was the better, as you say, but
Mm,
natural, fruit. Who
mm.
doesn't want fruit sugar? But it
Yeah,
turns out that fruit
not
sugar
to
in
be the
small
case.
quantities is fine, and in metabolically healthy people, we deal with it well. But as
Yeah.
soon as you become part of the Western world avalanche of metabolic ill health, this will be much more tricky for your
Indeed.
metabolism. So that's the message. Be careful. Fatty livers are out there. There's a lot of us with them that don't know we've got them. It will affect your functionality and it will definitely affect how you feel. And isn't that the thing?
That's the important thing. One of the important things.
Talk
Right.
soon.
Thank you, Marianne. See you soon.
Talk soon.
Bye.
Bye.